I remember the first time I realized something was truly wrong. It wasn't a dramatic moment or some explosive revelation. It was simply the way she smiled at me during a meeting, too composed, too calculated, like someone who had already decided what role I would play in her story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For 5 years, I worked as a marketing manager in a company that I'm certain everyone would recognize. I can't name it, not because I'm scared anymore, but because the legal agreements are still in place. What I can say is that it was a brand people associated with warmth, reliability, something almost nostalgic. A household name. A company that had once meant something to me too. When I joined, we were in the middle of rapid expansion. New offices, new projects, new hires every month. If you stood still, the world moved around you. If you blinked, you missed a promotion. I wasn't the most ambitious person in the room, but I was steady. I liked things I could build slowly. I liked to stay. I liked to belong. And for a while, I believed I did. I became good at what I did, not flashy, not loud, but reliable. Management liked me for that. Whenever a project fell apart or a department head left, I was the one who stepped in quietly to keep things together. I didn't complain when others were promoted faster. I told myself I didn't need the recognition. Stability was my promotion. Years passed, and the fast growth slowed, as it always does. The market changed. The world changed. Competitors appeared. Trends shifted. Our product, our once beloved product, was no longer the shiny star it used to be. Still good, still functional, but not exciting. And in business, not exciting is a slow death. Then she arrived. Our new CEO. When she walked into the office the first time, she had that energy that makes people straighten up automatically. Confident, warm, charismatic, not in a forced way, but in the way that made you want to believe she knew what she was doing. She shook everyone's hand, asked questions about families, remembered names. She smiled like she was already on good terms with everyone. I liked her. We all did. The first 3 months felt hopeful. Meetings had purpose. Budgets were reorganized. Plans were refreshed. She asked me personally to work on brand restructuring directions. I felt chosen, seen. Finally. But changes like that don't come without cost. The company needed money. Real money. Investors wanted results, not promises. And new products? That would require development, logistics, testing, at least a year or 2. The market wouldn't wait that long. So she offered what she called strategic repackaging. A new image for the same old product. She presented it at the all-staff meeting, standing in front of us with her hands folded calmly, as if the solution had always been simple. She spoke about reframing value, revitalizing emotional association, and enhancing perceived quality. But behind her elegant vocabulary, there was one truth. We were going to sell the same thing, just market it as something far more advanced than it really was. A lie. Not a white lie. A lie with numbers. A lie written into headlines. A lie that would shape customer expectations and exploit their trust. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Marketing is about perception, right? Everything is framing. Every brand exaggerates. Every slogan simplifies. Maybe this wasn't so different. But then I saw the campaign script. It didn't just exaggerate. It promised things our product absolutely could not do. And she wanted me to lead the rollout. I remember sitting in the conference room, the document open in front of me, everyone nodding along. My heart was beating in that slow, heavy way, like something inside me had just quietly cracked. When the meeting ended, she stopped me and smiled, placing a hand lightly on my arm. You understand narrative better than anyone here. I trust your judgment on how to deliver this. We need this to work. I nodded. But inside, something recoiled. That night, I stayed late. I sat there with the campaign plan glowing on the screen, my reflection faint in the dark window. The city outside was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I knew this wasn't what I signed up for. I knew it was wrong. I even drafted a resignation email. But I didn't send it. The next day, my manager called me into his office. The door closed behind me. He didn't waste time. "I know you're having doubts," he said, leaning back in his chair. His tone wasn't angry. It was almost sympathetic. "But you should understand something. If you walk away now, I can't guarantee your references. You know how this industry works. People talk. And we both know your entire career has been built here." I stared at him. It was a threat wrapped in a warning, wrapped in concern. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't seen before. They didn't want me to lead the campaign because they trusted me. They wanted me because I was loyal. Because they thought loyalty meant obedience. But loyalty is not obedience. And it was the first time I felt the quiet beginning of anger. I didn't show it, though. I simply nodded. I walked out. And I began to think about what I needed to do. And that was only the beginning. I didn't act right away. There's a popular fantasy that when you realize something is wrong, you stand up, make a speech, throw your badge on the table, and walk out heroic and untouchable. Real life is quieter, slower, and much, much heavier. For several weeks, I did what I always did. I worked. I joined meetings. I updated slides. I discussed campaign timelines and creative sourcing options. On the surface, I was cooperating. But internally, I was watching, listening, learning. If I was going to take them down, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. The first thing I realized was this. I was not the only one who was uncomfortable. During lunch breaks and late evenings, small comments slipped out from others. "This doesn't feel right. The messaging is too aggressive. We're basically lying, aren't we?" But they always said it quietly, almost jokingly. Like if they didn't say it seriously, it wouldn't be real. No one wanted to be the first to admit it out loud. One evening, after work, I invited a few colleagues out to a small bar near the office. A quiet place. Dark wood, old jazz music, soft lights that made you want to talk slower and think deeper. There were 4 of them. People who had joined the company around the same time I did. People who remembered when we were proud of what we made. We ordered drinks. Talked about life. Work. Then, slowly, the conversation turned. Not because I forced it, but because everyone felt it sitting there with us like an uninvited guest. "It's wrong," one of them finally said. A woman from branding. Smart. Kind. The kind of person who apologizes when someone else steps on her foot. She looked down at her glass as she spoke. "We're lying. There's no softer way to put it." Another nodded. He was the analytical type, logical to a fault. "It's not just ethically questionable. It's illegal under consumer protection laws if the claims are proven false." I didn't say anything yet. I needed to know where they were mentally. The 4th person, someone I'd always thought of as loyal to leadership, spoke more quietly. "I've started saving emails. Screenshots. Just in case." That sentence stayed in my mind like a spark landing in dry grass. We were all thinking the same thing. I leaned forward and finally spoke. "I'm not willing to go through with this. Not like this. I'm going to challenge it." No one looked surprised. But they did look afraid. Not afraid of me, afraid of what I was saying out loud. Because once words are spoken, reality changes shape. We talked for hours. We didn't yell. We didn't plan revenge. We simply admitted the truth. We could not be part of lying to the people who trusted the company we had helped build. By the time we left the bar, the first outlines of a plan existed, loose but real. I knew I couldn't just leak information. I had signed an NDA. And I wasn't just concerned about legal backlash. I didn't want to destroy myself just to make a point. So I contacted a lawyer. A quiet one. A thoughtful one. The kind who listens more than he talks. We met in a small office with fluorescent lights that flickered slightly, making everything look just a bit more tired than it already was. I explained everything, the strategy. The product misrepresentation, the internal pressure to comply. He listened, took notes, asked precise questions. And then he told me something that changed the entire trajectory. If the company engages in documented consumer fraud, NDAs do not protect them. NDAs are void when used to conceal illegal activity. But you need evidence. Not feelings. Not assumptions. Hard evidence. Internal documents. Directives. Proof of intent. Proof of intent. That was the key. It meant I had to stay inside longer. Even when every instinct wanted to run. It meant I had to keep smiling in meetings while collecting the very things that would one day expose them. So I did. Every day, I played my role. I praised drafts I despised. I nodded through presentations that twisted my stomach. I thanked leadership for clarity I knew was manipulation. But quietly, carefully. I saved email threads. I exported shared drive revisions. I photographed whiteboards after late strategy discussions. I archived Slack messages where executives admitted what they were doing. The others did too. We didn't talk often. We didn't dare to create a pattern. But we understood each other with something beyond language. The company moved forward with the campaign. Ads went live. Sales numbers rose. Investors smiled. The CEO called it proof that vision works. And I watched it all unfold like someone observing a burning building from behind glass. Everyone around me celebrated. But I was preparing. We were 1 week away from filing. And that's when everything began to go wrong. Not because of the CEO. Not because of upper management. But because someone among us, someone who had sat at that table, who had nodded, who had agreed, who had sworn this mattered, decided to betray us. I didn't know it yet. But I felt something shift. A tone in the hallway. A look in a meeting. A silence where warmth used to be. Something was coming. And what happened next changed everything. Peace doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it comes with understanding your own worth. Life after the judgment did not change all at once. There was no dramatic sunrise, no cinematic breakthrough where everyone suddenly understood one another. Instead, everything shifted slowly, piece by piece, like tectonic plates adjusting beneath the surface of things. My parents didn't call. I didn't expect them to. Weeks passed, then months. Birthdays, holidays, family gatherings came and went with a noticeable, silent absence. I received messages from relatives, carefully worded ones, asking if everything was all right and whether I might consider talking things out. I replied the same each time. There is nothing to talk out. There are documented facts and legal resolution. I wish them well. Not angry. Not accusing. Just final. Because anger was no longer the point. One evening in early spring, when the snow was mostly gone and the air smelled like wet earth, my sister called. I almost didn't answer, not out of spite, but out of caution. But something in me felt ready. Or maybe just tired enough to listen. Her voice was small. "Can we meet?" she asked. I suggested a small cafe near the botanical gardens, neutral ground, somewhere that didn't hold memories for either of us. When I arrived, she was already there, stirring a cup of tea that was likely already cold. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She looked thinner, like stress had been sculpting her for months. For a while, we said nothing. Then she spoke. "I didn't know it would get that far," she said. "I thought. I don't know what I thought. That they'd handle it. That it was temporary. That you'd manage." I listened, not interrupting. She needed to say it out loud. I needed to hear it. "It always felt like you were so strong," she continued. "Like nothing ever scared you. Like you didn't need anything. And I." She stopped. Her voice cracked. "And I always felt like I did." There it was, the unspoken truth of our childhood, distilled into one sentence. I wasn't the lucky one. I was the one expected to survive without needing. She wasn't the favored one. She was the one who was never allowed to stand alone. We were both shaped and damaged by the same imbalance. I didn't forgive her in that moment. But I understood her. And that was enough. We don't have to be what they made us, I said quietly. She nodded, tears in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to rebuild. We simply sat together a while longer, two adults finally seeing each other clearly. Sometimes, that is its own kind of closeness. My relationship with my parents remains distant. Polite. Reserved. Not hateful, just bounded. Defined. The way a fence defines a property line, not to imprison, but to clarify where one thing ends and another begins. They pay the loan. Slowly, but consistently. I don't ask how. I don't monitor them. The court does that for me now. We speak occasionally, birthdays, health updates, neutral topics. Our conversations are brief and factual. They have not apologized. I no longer wait for it. They are who they are. I am who I have become. And for the first time in my life, that difference does not wound me. Eva is older now, a little wiser, a little taller, still with that same bright laugh that makes everything feel lighter. She knows nothing of the lawsuit. She just knows that our home is a place where she is safe, where her feelings matter, where love doesn't have conditions attached to it. And my husband, Mark, still reaches for my hand in kitchens, in hallways, in crowded grocery stores. That small gesture is a reminder that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. I have learned that family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by care, respect, and responsibility. And loyalty without respect is not loyalty, it is submission. I will not submit ever again. Sometimes I drive past my parents' neighborhood. I don't stop. I don't feel ache or longing. I feel something simpler, a clear, steady peace. I did what I had to do. To protect my child. To protect my life. To protect the self I fought hard to build. This was never a story about revenge. It was a story about boundaries. About finally choosing myself. And in that choice, I did not lose a family. I simply stopped pretending I had one that was never really there. The weeks after leaving the company blurred into one another. I rented a small apartment downtown, a space so modest it barely held my belongings, let alone the weight of my thoughts. The walls were white, plain, a blank canvas that felt almost insulting in its simplicity. I spent mornings walking through the city, observing people bustling between cafes and offices, feeling simultaneously part of the world and completely outside of it. I reached out to a few old contacts, cautiously, quietly. Most avoided me. Some sympathized but could offer nothing. And yet, in that quiet void, I started noticing something I hadn't for years: time. Time that didn't belong to the company, to deadlines, to strategies, to campaigns that only ever benefited others. Time that I could fill with whatever I wanted. At first, it was the little things. I started cooking again. Simple meals, nothing fancy, just ingredients I enjoyed and flavors I remembered from childhood. I rejoined a small local gym, not for vanity but to remind myself that my body belonged to me. I read books that weren't on any professional development list, books that made me laugh, cry, or simply think. But the emptiness didn't disappear. The sting of betrayal, the sense of a future ripped away, that remained. And it was in that space, between the mundane and the painful, that I began thinking clearly. I realized that my moral compass had never wavered. I had tried to act in integrity, to expose wrongdoing, to hold the company accountable for a deception I could no longer ignore. And even though the attempt had failed, even though it had cost me my career, I had stayed true to myself. That realization became my anchor. One afternoon, a colleague from the bar night reached out. She was quiet in her tone, hesitant, apologetic. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I listened. I nodded. I accepted her words without judgment. Holding on to anger wouldn't change the past, it would only chain me to it. And I wasn't ready to be chained anymore. That evening, I opened a blank document on my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Then I began to write. Not an exposé. Not a confession. Not a plan for revenge. I wrote about my experience, my thoughts, my feelings, my observations, as a way to understand them, to process them. Paragraph by paragraph, memory by memory, the weight lifted, fraction by fraction. Writing became a ritual. Each morning I would sit with coffee, the city humming outside, and write. I wrote about the company, yes, but I also wrote about the small victories of my days, the warmth of sunlight through the window, the laughter of strangers in the cafe, the smell of fresh bread at the corner bakery. Life existed outside office walls. And it was beautiful. Months passed. Offers eventually trickled in, but this time, I was selective. I interviewed for roles not just for salary or prestige but for alignment, positions that allowed integrity to coexist with ambition. And slowly, I began to rebuild a career, one that reflected me, not the values of a company willing to sacrifice people for profit. I learned to trust again, cautiously, measuring character by actions, not words. I learned that betrayal is not always personal. Often, it's the product of fear, ambition, or survival instinct. And I discovered that even when the system seems designed to punish the honest, it cannot touch the core of a person who knows their worth. One evening, sitting on my small balcony with a notebook and a cup of tea, I reflected on the entire journey. The company, the director, the colleagues who had turned, they were ghosts now, memories in the margins. I had not won in the conventional sense. There was no public vindication, no triumphal announcement. But I had survived. I had preserved myself. And in that preservation, there was an unshakable victory. I realized, finally, that life is less about the battles we fight externally and more about the ones we win internally. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, resilient, and steady. Sometimes it's leaving a situation that no longer aligns with your principles, even if it costs everything else. And in that quiet strength, I found peace. Because true power is not in controlling others, manipulating outcomes, or winning recognition. True power is knowing who you are, standing by your values, and continuing forward with dignity, even when the world has taken everything else. The city lights flickered on as night fell. I sipped my tea, notebook open on my lap, and allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Life had thrown me into chaos, yes, but it had also taught me something no promotion, no title, and no paycheck ever could. Integrity, once intact, is unbreakable. And I was whole again. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing patterns I had ignored for years. The tiny micro decisions we make, the way people justify shortcuts or rationalize unethical choices, the quiet compromises that creep into daily life. I had been part of that world, willingly or not, and the realization was both humbling and infuriating. But it was also liberating. I no longer had to measure myself by the standards of those who had neither respect nor scruples. I began reconnecting with colleagues who had left the company years earlier. We exchanged stories, tales of similar betrayals, quiet victories, and mistakes made in the pursuit of careers we thought we loved. Surprisingly, these conversations became therapeutic. I realized that honesty, even if delayed or partial, had value. A shared acknowledgement of what had happened, without rancor or blame, reminded me that I wasn't alone. One afternoon, I wandered into a small cafe tucked away on a side street, a place I had passed hundreds of times but never entered. The smell of roasting coffee beans and the soft hum of conversation felt like a balm. I sat at a corner table and opened my notebook. My pen moved fluidly across the page, not in panic or urgency, but in contemplation. I wrote about the director, the manipulations, the colleagues who had abandoned me, the lessons I had learned, and the small victories of my newfound independence. These small victories became my anchor. Making my own schedule. Eating breakfast slowly instead of in a rush to meetings. Walking home from the cafe instead of taking the train, letting the cool wind wash over me. I was learning to live in moments that had previously seemed inconsequential but were now full of significance. The process wasn't instantaneous. There were mornings when I woke with the weight of failure pressing down on my chest, the sting of betrayal still fresh. I would sit quietly, sipping my coffee, thinking about how easy it would have been to allow bitterness to consume me. But each time, I chose a different path. I focused on actions that reinforced my sense of self, completing a small task, helping a stranger, or simply being present. Slowly, that became habitual. It was during one of these mornings, watching the city awaken, that I realized something profound. The company, the director, the failed plan. They had all been external challenges, obstacles to navigate. But the real test had been internal. Could I maintain my integrity, my dignity, my values, in the face of profound disappointment? And the answer was yes. I could, and I had. Months later, I began cautiously exploring career options again. I reached out to small startups, local companies, and independent consultants. This time, I asked questions that mattered. What are your values? How do you treat employees? Are there ethical standards beyond profit? Surprisingly, several opportunities aligned with my standards. I accepted a role as a consultant for a small marketing firm. The pay wasn't extravagant, but the environment was supportive. And the leadership valued honesty above all else. It was a slow adjustment. I reminded myself constantly not to let past experiences dictate my behavior. I practiced active listening, ensuring my voice was heard without becoming confrontational. I took notes on processes, keeping an eye out for any signs of manipulation or shortcuts. And I began mentoring junior colleagues, encouraging them to make ethical decisions even when it might seem inconvenient. At the same time, I reconnected with old friends outside of work. Coffee dates, weekend hikes, and long conversations reminded me of life beyond deadlines and spreadsheets. I allowed myself to laugh again, fully and without reservation. I noticed that my perspective had shifted. I no longer feared conflict or confrontation, but I also no longer sought validation through approval or status. The subtle changes accumulated over time. I noticed mornings felt lighter, and the anxiety that had once defined my life at the previous company diminished. Even moments of frustration. When a campaign didn't go perfectly or a colleague made a careless mistake, no longer triggered the paralyzing fear of failure. I had built resilience. Oddly enough, the director never approached me again. I had half expected a confrontation, a legal threat, or even some subtle sabotage. But nothing came. Perhaps she had underestimated me, or perhaps she had already shifted her attention to other employees. Either way, I realized I had already won, not through confrontation, litigation, or revenge, but simply by surviving, by refusing to compromise my principles. One afternoon, while working on a small campaign, I received an email from an old colleague, someone who had left the company months before I did. They thanked me for sharing insights and for being a voice of reason when others had remained silent. Reading their words, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. I had influenced at least one person to uphold their values in a difficult environment. That, I decided, was more powerful than any legal victory. Years later, I often reflect on those events not with anger, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the clarity they forced upon me, for the lessons that shaped my character, and for the resilience I discovered within myself. I still remember the first night I sat in my small apartment, feeling utterly lost, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. It seemed unbearable then. But now, I see it as a necessary crucible. I have built a career I am proud of. One that allows me to balance ambition with ethics. I have formed relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenience. And I have learned that integrity is not just about doing what is right in the eyes of others, but about staying true to yourself, even when it costs you everything. Sometimes, when walking past the headquarters of my old company, I feel a pang of what could have been, a reminder of the allure of security and prestige. But I don't dwell on it. I don't need to. I am living a life defined not by the expectations of others, but by my own principles, values, and choices. I have learned that moral courage is quiet. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't guarantee wealth or status. But it preserves the most essential thing, the self. And in preserving that, all else becomes manageable. I sip my coffee as the sun rises, watching the city awaken again. I feel a calm I never knew was possible during my years of ambition and anxiety. I am no longer defined by the company, by betrayal, or by lost opportunities. I am defined by the choices I make today, by the life I continue to build, and by the knowledge that integrity, once maintained, is unbreakable. And that, I realize, is enough.